Greetings and welcome to Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation. To our members, friends, and everyone joining us in our virtual congregation on YouTube today.
Hello, I'm the Reverend Robin Landerman Zucker, minister of this congregation, and I will be hosting our virtual recorded service today on YouTube for Sunday, May 9th, 2021, with Worship Associate Char Tarashanti and music from Stephanie Galloway, the UU Virtual Choir of Arizona, and other recorded selections. My sermon for today, Mother's Day, is entitled Inside the Red Tent, Wisdom Between Mothers and Daughters, and Char will also share a personal reflection she's written on the topic. We're glad you're here and that you've made Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation part of this day in your spiritual life, whether you are a regular viewer or you're tuning in for the first time. We're here every week on YouTube, and we will be at home at 510 North LaRue Street in Flagstaff as soon as it is safe to be together again. We are hoping to begin some services in our backyard on June 20th. Check the e-news and the website for updates on that. Our congregation is spiritually open and intentionally inclusive. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are always welcome here, and we will joyfully marry you here as well. Our members and friends bring many viewpoints, interests, and theologies to our door. And here we trust that you will find a common desire for meaningful community and spiritual growth, and for relevant religious exploration in a framework with very flexible borders. Membership in this congregation is open to anyone who chooses to walk with us in the spirit of love, the search for truth, and the pursuit of justice. As I light the chalice, the symbol of our free faith, I invite you to light a candle or a chalice at home and join in the response words you will see on your screen. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the darkness of isolation and are warmed by the fires of our inner connection. Beacon's mission and covenant express our values and our vision of ourselves as a gathered community in the world. Please join me in reciting the mission and covenant. You will see the words on your screen. The mission of Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation is to be a welcoming community that embraces diverse thought and belief and builds a just, peaceful, and compassionate world. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in kindness. Thus do we covenant. And now Worship Associate Char Tarashanti has some opening words for us.
Our opening words this morning are from Nikki Giovanni, Legacies. Her grandmother called her from the playground. "Yes, ma'am. I want you to learn how to make rolls," said the old woman proudly. But the little girl didn't want to learn how, because she knew, even if she couldn't say it, that would mean when the old one died, she would be less dependent on her spirit. So she said, "I don't want to know how to make no rolls," with her lips poked out. And the old woman wiped her hands on her apron, saying, "Lord, these children," and neither of them ever said what they meant, and I guess nobody ever does.
Sleep, my child, and peace attend you all through the night. I who love you
Now is the time in our service when you're invited to share personal joy or sorrow in the supportive presence of this community. I don't have any specific joys and sorrows to share this week, but I know many are starting to travel again, traveling back to Flagstaff, traveling to see family, and that is certainly a joy. Our tradition is to take stones and place them in water, symbolizing that what touches one of us, whether it's a joy or a sorrow, like ripples in the water, affects all of us. In addition to these joys, being able to see family and connect and get a little bit more out into the world as things open up, there continue to be sorrows. People we lose, people we miss, tragedies around the world, injustices around the world. And these are sorrows and concerns. So a stone for that. Last week, I offered a longer period of joys and sorrows for you to speak your own joys and sorrows and ponder them, and I'll continue with that practice this week. But I will say that everyone is fighting their own private battle, and there are many joys and sorrows that remain unspoken because they are either too tender or too private to share. But let us remember that everyone is fighting a battle, all their own. So let us be kind, compassionate, flexible, and forgiving with one another. So in a moment, you will have the opportunity to have some silence, to ponder and speak, if you'd like, your own joys and sorrows, followed by some breathing meditation music, where we will breathe intentionally, 4 beats in slowly through our nose, 5 beats out slowly through our mouth, in a steady stream, creating spaciousness as we go.
The wisdom that I received from my mother, and what I hope I have transmitted to my daughters, is not so much spoken words, but the actions of everyday living. I was fortunate to have a mother who was easy to talk to and who took the time and the care to have frequent conversations with me throughout the almost 60 years of our earthly relationship. We talked about intimate female topics as well as life in general. Her example is one I am committed to emulate with my own 2 daughters, and just as importantly, I think, with my son. Although I have made some different choices in the particulars of values and beliefs passed on to me from my mom, the positive impact of her openness has been a guiding principle throughout my own motherhood and my way of being in the world. Mom's unfailing acceptance of me and my need to choose different answers to life's big questions, even though I'm sure it was hard, even hurtful to her at times, has been a light on my path of relationship with my children. Mom began working outside the home when I was still quite young. Monday through Friday, she went off to work as a lowly bookkeeper, impeccably attired in a dress or suit, hose, pumps, matching accessories, and tangy lipstick, the only makeup she ever used. Whatever dignity was accorded to her position in that male-dominated environment was due, I believe, to her unwavering sense of self-esteem and professionalism that radiated from her internal attitude to her outer appearance. This high standard has been a strong influence in my life, and although fashions have certainly changed through the generations, her work ethic and pride in professionalism prevails in me and in my children. I was privileged to have the opportunity to return my mom's loving care during the last few years of her life. As her physical health declined, I learned a lot about patience, both from witnessing her need to accept help with things that she had done for herself most of her life, and also the awareness of my own struggle with having to slow down and do things at a pace more comfortable for her. I'm sure that at times she would have preferred that I do some things differently, but instead of complaining, she only expressed gratitude for my sincere efforts. The importance and healing qualities of gratitude is a gift that I received from her gracious example. Of all the wisdom gifts that Mom passed on to me through the example of her life, openness, acceptance of me even when my choices were not in alignment with her beliefs, a sense of pride and professionalism in work, patience and gratitude. The most significant gift and lesson was that of unconditional love. Since she had moved into my home with all of her personal possessions and my siblings lived halfway across the country, I inherited by default most of her belongings when she died. Out of the furniture, flatware, and photo albums, there is one small item that I prize above all others because it reminds me daily of the greatest wisdom that my mom passed on to me. It is a porcelain heart-shaped paperweight with an image of the cartoon character Ziggy and these words: "Love is the answer. Who cares what the question is?" I hold these words as my highest value and strive to live them every day. Although I'm not successful 100% of the time, the true value, I believe, is in the trying.
Yesterday a child came out to wander, caught a dragonfly inside a jar. Fearful when the sky was full of thunder, and tearful at the falling of a star.
And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in the circle game. Then the child moved 10 times round the seasons, skated over 10 clear frozen streams. Words like, when you're older, must appease them, and promises of someday make their dreams. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in the circle game. 16 springs and 16 summers gone now.
Cartwheels turn to car wheels through the town. And we tell them, take your time, it won't be long now.
Till you drag your feet to slow the circles down. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in the circle game. So the years swing by, and now the child is 20. Though the dreams have lost some grandeur coming true, there'll be new dreams, many better dreams, and plenty, before the last revolving year is through. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return, we can only look behind from where we came, and go round and round and round in the circle game. And go round and round and round in the circle game.
My sermon today is entitled, Inside the Red Tent, Wisdom Between Mothers and Daughters. If you want to understand any woman, you must first ask about her mother and listen carefully. The more the daughter knows the details of her mother's life without flinching or whining, the stronger the daughter. This is the voice of Dina in the best-selling book, The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. Perhaps you've never heard of the biblical character Dina. She wouldn't be surprised. The only daughter of Jacob, Dina is portrayed in Genesis 34 primarily as a victim and as property in the tale of her rape by Shechem and the resulting revenge. Dina laments in the book that she has become a footnote, that her memory is dust, that no one recalls her skills as a midwife or the song she sang or the bread she baked for her 12 insatiable brothers. But inside the red tent, she is so much more. Beloved daughter, blossoming woman, bereft lover, young mother, valuable keeper of lore in the lineage of blood. The red tent is a place full of moons, mystery, and traditions. A place where women remain separate for 3 days during the time of their menstruation, sharing stories and wisdom and deep connection. After reading this book some years ago, a colleague of mine joked that if men were required to spend 3 days in a tent, they would want a ball to throw around. I'm not sure that's true, and no offense, guys. Women are wired to be relational, and the red tent is an unabashedly relational and female refuge. As Dina explains, she has 4 mothers: Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Bilhah, each of them scolding, teaching, and cherishing something different about me, she writes, giving me different gifts, cursing me with different fears. Leah gave me birth and her splendid arrogance. Rachel showed me where to place the midwife's brick and how to fix my hair. Zilpah made me think. Bilhah listened. No 2 mothers seasoned their stew the same way. Women want daughters to keep their memories alive, Dina tells us. My mother and my mother aunties told me endless stories, she says, no matter what their hands were doing, holding babies, cooking, spinning, weaving, they filled my ears. In the ruddy shade of the red tent, the menstrual tent, Dina recalls, they ran their fingers through my curls, repeating the escapades of their youth and the sagas of their childbirth. Their stories were like offerings of hope and strength poured out before the Queen of Heaven. Only these gifts were not for a god or a goddess. They were for me. Over and over in this memorable book, we're privy to the intricacies of being instructed in the ways of the women. In one gut-wrenching passage, Tabia is banished and cursed by Rebecca because she has not been taught properly by her mother, who is an outsider to the tribe. The chain of identity has been severed, and she herself is broken in mind, body, and spirit, and it's heartbreaking. Reading and speaking Dina's words as a mother, as a cisgender woman, as a daughter, as a minister, as a crone, I must admit how I long for the red tent. Even so, my yearning leads me to ask this morning whether there is such a thing anymore as teaching our daughters properly in the ways of the woman, especially now that gender identities have broadened so much, and there is gratefully no one way to even define being a woman or a trans woman or a woman spelled W-O-M-Y-N, to name a few. When there is gratefully no one way in which to be schooled with the world opened up to so many permutations and so much free will and self-differentiation and self-actualization for all gender identities. I'm wondering what timeless wisdom we might impart to our daughters in the year 2021, when the red tent now takes the form of a front row seat in the car, a noisy table at a food court, text messages, Zoom chats this past 15 months, Instagram likes, and maybe a few stolen moments in the hallway before bedtime or while people are running off where they need to go in the morning. Alas, in this modern age of mobility and overscheduled children and overextended moms, this pandemic year notwithstanding, because it will rise again, we can't really realistically set aside 3 full days every month for deep connection, can we? Some days it seems that multitasking moms can barely spare 3 minutes. I remember those days. Who would drive the carpool, pack the lunches, sign the permission slips, maintain a career, update your Facebook status, call the plumber, chair a committee at school or work or in the community? So how can mother and daughter connect now? Sharing wisdom, offering gifts of hope and strength, nurturing and being nurtured. And why does this bond continue to be so crucial to well-being across the generations? First, I'd like to ask us to interpret the terms mother and daughter in the broadest possible sense. In the red tent, Dina talks about having 4 mothers. Only one is biological. The other are spiritual mothers, adoptive mothers, aunties, and guides. A daughter can be the product of our own womb, or she could be a girl or woman we love and mentor, and with whom we share our wisdom, and vice versa. Using this definition, we can employ endless combinations of mother-daughter, sisters, close confidants and friends, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, aunts and nieces, cousins, teacher and student, crone and maiden. I'd argue that if we nurture a female, or are nurtured by one, then we reside together in the red tent. And yes, I am painfully aware of wounded women among us today who haven't experienced caring or guidance from a mother, the one who raised them or another mother, and that memories of mom reside in a tent red with anger or neglect or even abuse. So Mother's Day isn't a day of joy. It's a day of sorrow. And I want to acknowledge that. I share your sorrow, and I encourage you to cast yourself perhaps in one of the other mother-daughter pairings I've just mentioned, if you haven't done so already, where you might find or have already found nurture. Maybe it's a grandmother or someone else in your life. If you are a man of any permutation listening today, I ask that you relate my words to any mother or daughter or woman you love. In writing this sermon, I've explored my own history, looking for women's wisdom to recollect and share, not just with my daughter Michaela, but with all of you this morning. I suppose when I consider my own story, I have had at least 4 mothers. And as a person of Jewish heritage, I got a good chuckle from Dina's remark that she had 4 mothers. 4 Jewish mothers. Oy vey, a blessing and a curse, I would say, from experience, and as one myself. The Jewish mother, a distinctive blend of adoration, overprotection, hyperbole, and guilt. Who but a Jewish mother would look at a Nerf ball and lament, you could put an eye out with that thing? If Sam and Michaela are listening today, they are nodding their heads, laughing, and pointing at me. Mea culpa. One daughter in New York City named Amy Borkowski has done all she could to keep her well-meaning, quintessential Jewish mother at bay. Amy jokes that her mother still checks off full-time mother on forms, even though Amy is 40. And it's true, she is a full-time mother with over-concern just encoded into her DNA. Amy has collected her mother's maddening but hilarious answering machine messages over the years, and she's compiled them into a book called Amy's Answering Machine. Mom calls her daughter Amola, by the way, as in beep. Hi, Amola. If you haven't already left to go to the Motor Vehicles Bureau, keep in mind that the wait is very long, so before you get into line, you might want to empty your bladder. Or beep, yeah, Amola, so you don't set off the metal detector at the airport, make sure that when you leave the house, you don't wear an underwire bra. Like just about everybody else, Amy is frustrated by her mother's constant advice and worrying, yet she's torn because she does realize how unique a mother's love is. Says Amy, the most devoted friend, lover, or even husband would never call you in a panic to warn you to alternate which side you wear your purse so your shoulders don't get uneven. I don't recall anyone quite like Amy's mother in my lineage, but I do recall a powerful ritual honoring the chain of women in one's life at a UU church retreat I attended many years ago. When the candle passed to me, I intoned, "I am Robin, great-granddaughter of Rebecca, granddaughter of Esther, daughter of Flora, mother of Michaela." It was powerful. This is my genesis of Jewish mothers and daughters, and I've both carried forward their wisdom and set off in new, bolder directions, just like Dinah journeying into Egypt. Like them, I've been both overprotective and neglectful. I wear their legacy like a blood-red tattoo. I talked a bit about my mother, Flora, in my sermon just a few weeks ago on April 18th. She was a homemaker with flair and a talented amateur painter. After school, I would come home and watch soap operas with her, the guiding light mostly, and we'd chat about our day. Dinner was on the table religiously at 6 o'clock, and it was always delicious and representative of the 4 major food groups. I learned through proximity and osmosis, more than like direct teaching, about broiling a steak and organizing a dinner party, coordinating an outfit, and arranging paintings on a wall. About summer vacations at the beach and how parents show up on visiting day at summer camp. And like Dinah, I learned painful lessons too, and the wisdom of disappointment and loss, fear and longing. After nearly 30 years, the marriage she believed was unbreakable shattered. And then she fell ill. And when she died of cancer at age 55 in 1986, I worried that the chain would be broken. My daughter Michaela began asking about her as soon as she could communicate. She would literally toddle over and get my mother's picture and bring it back to me, look me straight in the eye and say, "Your mommy died." On some inexplicable, almost primal level, she wanted me to keep my mother's stories alive and share them with her. I've tried not to disappoint her, even though the stories are not all fairy tales with happy endings, because they seldom are. Perhaps this is one of the gifts we can give our daughters, to be honest with them about the Cinderella myth and the happily ever afters. That the enchanted castle may have a glass ceiling and a sticky floor, and that it may be more useful to learn how to ride the white horse than expect to be rescued by a dashing prince astride one, or princess for that matter. I identify utterly with Dinah when she explains that stories about food show a strong connection between mother and daughter. Teaching your daughter to cook, especially traditional family dishes, is a timeless way to maintain the chain. Like the girl in Nikki Giovanni's poem Legacies who doesn't want to know how to make no rolls, Michaela was reluctant at first to learn some of the family recipes, but now she is a fine cook and baker. My mom and my grandmother are quelling in heaven. I recall an incident several years ago when I wanted to make my grandma Esther's Nudelkugel, a sweet, creamy dessert. But then I panicked. What if I didn't have the recipe? Where would I get it now that both my grandmother and my mother were dead? TheRedTent.com? My heart raced as I pulled down my mother's well-worn leather recipe box from the pantry shelf. It was dusty from scant use over the years, but just holding it proved to be moving and poignant. I started leafing through the box. Every card a mouth-watering memory or association. Brisket with cherry wine, sweet and sour meatballs, and her specialty, scintillating lemon pie. And finally, I located the coveted kugel recipe, scrawled in my mother's graceful and familiar handwriting on a yellowing recipe card. And in her fashion, she had jotted the word "yum!" in the corner. The ingredients are pedestrian and the recipe is simple, but for me, creating the dessert was like performing a sacred ritual. As I beat the eggs and sprinkled the cinnamon, I realized that it was a lot more than a recipe for Nudelkugel. It's a recipe for connection, a form of Jewish table wisdom passed down by the women in my family, grandmother to me, to my daughter. A legacy blended and baked and sweetened with joy and sorrow. Eat this in memory of me, calls out my grandmother from beyond. The memory and influence of her, my grandma Esther, remains so strong in my life, really stronger as I get older. She was a trained milliner, and I remember these exquisite Barbie clothes she fashioned from scraps of elegant fabric she had used to make into her own wardrobe, these beautiful suits she would make. And Michaela played with these Barbie clothes too, and now they're in safekeeping. I recall sleepovers in her trim apartment and mouth-watering meals prepared in her tiny kitchen, the various dishes cooking in pots that were stacked amazingly and precariously on top of one another. I remember her courage and determination to raise my mother through the Depression after she was widowed, and her much-lauded dedication to Jewish causes, especially Hadassah and B'nai B'rith. I recall her energy, her humor, her style, her grit, her marvelous hats. And I especially recall her funeral. As a very small group of us stood graveside, the rabbi declared that because there were not enough men formed there to form a minyan of 10, we could not say the Jewish prayers for the dead. I stepped forward and I told the startled rabbi that I would say prayers for my grandma Esther because she deserved prayers regardless of who was there. I made them up on the spot, spoke them in English and in a woman's voice. How ironic that she had been named for the biblical heroine who would not be silent. I would not be silent then, and I should not be silent now. I honored her then, and I hope to honor her now as I serve as a role model for my own daughter. In that spirit, we can encourage our daughters to speak in their authentic voices, to not be silent or silenced by louder, deeper voices, to be both strong and gentle women, leaders and lovers, to be vulnerable but also courageous in the face of adversity. Listening to our daughters will empower them to expect the world to listen to. Many of us are aware of issues of self-esteem among girls, especially in their pivotal adolescent years. When I recall my own girlhood, I envision this pixie-topped, willful tomboy with moxie and plenty of ideas of her own. I guess some things never change. But then adolescence hit, and I experienced most of the transitions we've read about in all the books. All of a sudden, I wondered, am I smart enough, thin enough, good enough, dateable enough? And my voice became smaller. There's a pushing mom away. I'm not like her, we shriek, but with the underlying plea, keep loving me and believing in me. And then, unless the relationship has become irreparably damaged and toxic, there is a circling back. Mother can magically become wise again, and daughter gratefully can become huggable again. And with enough time under the red tent, regardless of its form, mother and daughter do not become lost to one another. So mothers, keep loving and believing in your daughters as you are forced to let them go. And daughters, trust that the red tent will not vanish as you test your wings. It turns out that sustaining the matrilineal line has crucial health benefits for grandmothers, mothers, and children. It's a cycle of nurturance. You heard that in Char's reflection, that blood red tattoo I spoke of earlier. In an essay for the New York Times written just this past week, Abigail Tucker explains that when she first became a mom in 2011, She lived 282 miles away from her mother. She missed her during the calm, sweet moments and during the cranky afternoons, too. 5 years later, she moved closer to her mother, and then the pandemic hit, and Abigail's husband ended up in the emergency room with COVID, and she was 7 months pregnant with their third child. "I'm coming over," her mom declared. "I'm not afraid." This devotion, this all hands on deck, pays dividends for everyone. Studies show that strong mother-daughter bonds and mother-daughter-grandmother bonds can decrease miscarriages and C-sections, reduce stress, and that grandmothers can provide a valuable and important emotional buffer between mother and child. Other auntie moms and such can do that too. In fact, another one of my mothers was my Aunt Inky, one of the few true career women I knew in my baby boomer childhood. She was a social worker, and I thought she was really cool and really strange. But she told me a story that I'll never forget about how she succumbed to societal guilt and became a stay-at-home mom, greeting her daughters after school with platters of warm, home-baked cookies. One day, my cousin Laura came through the door, sneered at the cookies, and whined, "Can't we just have Oreos?" And my Aunt Inky went back to work the following week. Dina was expected to follow a prescribed path, but we can encourage our daughters to follow their own path, just like my Aunt Inky did, even if it's scrutinized or slammed. We can let them know that it is okay to be a mother and or vice president, homemaker or social worker, minister or volunteer, lawyer, librarian, CEO, or some combination thereof, by claiming and celebrating our own choices and by admitting our mistakes. Perhaps the greatest wisdom I can share with Michaela, now 31, married and settled, and someday with my 1-year-old granddaughter, Ruby, is that womanhood is not about either ors. That I hope, among other things, she will speak in her own voice and also be a good listener. That she'll be both safe and brave. That she'll look for bargains and also splurge occasionally. That she'll keep her elbows clean and also let herself get sweaty on a hike. That she'll be deeply connected to her partner and retain her own identity. That she'll believe in herself and have faith that I believe in her. Her grandmother believes in her, and her great-grandmother believes in her, even beyond death, just like her foremothers did for me. Recently, I sent my daughter Grandma Esther's kugel recipe. It was one way to reconnect the chain of my womankin. Even though we meet now on FaceTime or under the canopy of a patio awning by porch light, the metaphor remains. The tent is blood red, the moon glows in its fullness. The wisdom is still ours to carry and share. Let us hold our daughters of womb and of heart close to us in the tent and hear the timeless voice of Dina saying, "If you love me, teach me to thrive someday without you, to be my own Genesis." So may it be. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen.
Sarah's circle, we are dancing.
week in our service, whether we're here in our physical sanctuary or here in our virtual sanctuary, we take an offering to support Beacon building, staff, programs. There are 2 ways for you to donate to Beacon today. You can go to our website, www.beaconuu.com, and make a secure online donation through the Vanco application. If you use this method, we ask that you use a bank account rather than a credit or debit card to save us some fees, so there will be more for Beacon. Or you can send us a check to Beacon, 510 North LaRue Street, Flagstaff, Arizona, 86001, and please put offering in the note. Either way, we are so grateful for your generosity, especially during this challenging and transitional time. We so look forward to being able to pass this bowl hand to hand to you, hopefully in the fall, right here in our beautiful building. And finally, at the end of our service, what our tradition is to stand in a circle and hold hands and feel tangibly the warmth, the love, and the connection of this community. So we have been doing that virtually. I invite you to put out your hands, imagining that we are in fact in that circle holding hands, feeling the presence of that love, that warmth, and that connection. Because whether we are together or apart, as we've learned, Beacon, we are always connected. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen. Stay safe and well. Reach out to me anytime at minister@beaconuu.com. And now Char has some closing words for us.
Our closing words today are from Naomi Long Madgett. Offspring. I tried to tell her, this way the twig is bent. Born of my trunk and strengthened by my roots, you must stretch new-grown branches closer to the sun than I can reach. I wanted to say, extend myself to that far atmosphere only my dreams allow. But the twig broke. And yesterday, I saw her walking down an unfamiliar street, feet confident, face slanted upward toward a threatening sky. And she was smiling. And she was her very free, her very individual, unpliable own.